Welcome to ONNpoint. My name is Tim Murphy, and joining me today on ONNpoint we have Dr. Gail Broad. She is an associate professor emeritus, emerita. I've been doing this for days now, practicing how to say emerita, from Algoma University.
Thank you.
And also Nordic Institute. And we also have Mr. Bud Wildman, who is a former, oh my gosh, everything, minister. You were a cabinet minister, and you were also a member of provincial parliament for Algoma East for 20.
Algoma.
Algoma. How many years?
24 years.
24 years. So, this is now the day after the election, where this episode will be airing on Tuesday of next week. So we're going to have a little breather room before the public watches this. But we're here just to sort of reflect on what happened yesterday and what the future might look like for Sault Ste. Marie and for the province of Ontario under a majority government, PC, with Doug Ford as the Premier of Ontario. Let's start with last night. How about we go back to the voter turnout? What were your thoughts on how we did Sault Ste. Marie at the polls, in Sault Ste. Marie at the polls with voter turnout? Gail?
Well, certainly there was a substantial increase from the last provincial elections, as well as the by-election last year. Normally by-elections are lower turnouts, but we're still, there's still almost 1/3 of Sault Ste. Marie voters that did not come out to the polls last night. So there's still 1/3 that are either disaffected or for some other reason chose not to cast a ballot in last night's election. So you know, there's still a substantial number of people that we aren't reaching out there. However, I think it was very positive that we had a much larger turnout than we've had previously.
What were your thoughts on that, Bud, about the turnout for them?
Well, it's interesting. Where I was actually working in Algoma, Manitoulin riding yesterday. There were a lot of young people, particularly young women, who came out to vote. And that was true in the last federal election as well. And it's interesting. But overall, the turnout was higher because there was more interest. But it was still a substantial number that did not go out to vote, which says something about our political culture and the state of our democracy. People are busy, leading busy lives, so they have other things that are important to them. But it's vitally important that when we're talking about the future of our province, that people have a say. I used to say to people who were thinking of not voting, well, if you don't vote, you really have no reason to complain afterwards.
Absolutely. Do you think that people not seeing themselves represented either by a party or platform or a candidate, that they just don't see themselves or their opinions reflected in any of the options, and therefore they've just chosen to disengage? Do you think that could be part of it? They're not, that the parties themselves aren't reaching the people?
That certainly can be part of it. I think that and we see that perhaps possibly in the gains of some of the parties that are not as well known. For example, the Northern Ontario Party in Sault Ste. Marie received almost 1,000 votes. I was surprised at the Green Party, for example, which also received a few more votes than the Northern Ontario Party. But the Green Party has been building their constituency over a number of elections with a consistent candidate who I think presents their platform well.
I agree.
And she's been building, as I say, building towards 1,000 votes for some time.
Yes.
Whereas the Northern Ontario Party, which was brand new in this election, achieved almost the same. And I think sometimes when you see that is an indication that there may be, as you say, disaffected voters who are looking for someone that will speak to the concerns that they may have.
Well, I think that the success of so-called fringe parties is a reflection that there were a lot of Liberals who accepted the view that this was time for a change. This was a change election. they couldn't bring themselves to vote for the New Democrats or the Conservatives, and so they chose to vote for one of the other parties. And some of them stayed home, whereas some of them also stuck with the party no matter what. And I can understand their loyalty to their principles. But I think there were a lot of very, very undecided people right up to the end. And a lot of them, I think, were liberals who just didn't know what to do, particularly after Premier Wynne announced that a week in advance of the election day that she had no chance of winning.
What were your thoughts when you heard that? When Premier Wynne came out and said, I know I'm not going to win, sorry, not sorry, I know I'm not going to win, so now here's what we need to do to be strategic.
Well, this is an old argument about strategic voting, but it's interesting that she didn't advocate strategic voting the way the Liberals have in provincial and federal elections for the last 5 elections. They've been saying to the populace, to the electorate, and particularly to New Democrats supporters, that if you want to stop a Conservative government, you've got to vote Liberal, whether you like it or not.
Mm-hmm.
When it became obvious that if you wanted to stop a Conservative government this time, whether you like it or not, it was Liberals that had to make a choice, and instead she said, still vote Liberal.
Uh-huh.
Even though we're going to lose, save our party status in the legislature, which she failed to do, actually, by losing her own seat.
She lost her seat?
Yes.
No, she
No, didn't she?
She-
But no,
no,
she
she
lost.
won her
She
seat.
won her seat, but she lost she needed 8 seats
Right.
for
By
official
the end of the
party
night, they said
status.
they had 9. They didn't have 9.
No,
No,
they
they
ended
wound
up
up
with
with
7.
Oh, see, I went to bed. They only ended up with 7,
Yes.
so they lost their status.
Yeah,
That's
so
correct.
that means they
Oh
don't get
my
nearly the
gosh.
funding, they don't get the recognition that a third party normally gets in terms of questions and question period, and
This is what
they'll get questions, but they won't get as many, and they won't have research funding to support them, unless,
Yeah.
and this is a possibility, unless the other 2 parties, particularly the Conservatives, are magnanimous and say, well, even though you didn't get official party status, we'll give you additional funding. That has happened on occasions in the past, but that's just up to the goodwill of the government particularly, but also the opposition party, the NDP.
And it should be noted that across the province in the popular vote, again, we have our first past the post
Yeah.
system, which, you know, sort of ignores the popular vote. And in the popular vote, the Liberals were still at 19% of the popular vote. So
Yes.
if you look at that, you know, that's basically 1 in 5 Ontarians were still voting Liberal.
Yeah.
And as we've just discussed, they, you know, there may have been many others who chose not to, or to support the so-called fringe parties in an effort to not
Right.
lose their vote.
The
as we
interesting
say.
thing about the
But I'm sorry, hold that thought. I
Yeah.
have to take a quick commercial.
Okay,
break.
sure.
And when we come back, we'll come back to that thought. So stay with us on point. Joining us, Dr. Gail Broad and Bud Wildman, talking about the provincial election. We'll be right back with more. So we're back with Dr. Gail Broad and Bud Wildman. Gail was addressing the issue of first past the post and the fact that the popular vote was. Bud, you were going to address that.
Yeah, to explain this a bit, the Conservative vote was much more efficient than the NDP vote. Particularly with incumbents, New Democrats won by enormous margins in the ridings they already held. Whereas, and that was true of some Conservative incumbents as well. But the difference was the Conservative vote was spread across the whole province. And they won seats, particularly in Toronto, by small margins, even though the New Democrats were very close to them. Whereas a lot of the NDP votes that showed up in the popular vote across the province were concentrated in the north, southwestern Ontario, and the Conservative vote was spread more evenly across the province. So that's one of the reasons they won as many seats as they did. And you got to give them credit. They ran, from their standpoint, a very good campaign and were well organized across the province.
But again, it comes back to, in the final analysis, the Conservatives received 40% of the popular vote, and the NDP received 37% of the popular vote. So basically 3% difference.
And yet-
and actually that's rather reflected in the Sault Ste. Marie riding, where there was a difference of 400
So
votes in, you know, both the candidates, both the Conservative, Ross Romano, the incumbent, as well as the NDP candidate.
Chapman Hamill?
No.
Oh, sorry,
Michelle
sorry,
McLeave
Miss-
Kennedy.
yes.
There was, they both received over 11,000 votes, and there was, you know, this very small.
Narrow margin.
Actually,
Slightly over 400 votes
I think
between
if Ms. Hamill had won, say, up to 15% of the vote, there would have been a different result. The New Democrats would have won the election in the Sioux. It's hard to guess that. That's speculative, of course. But it's interesting that in this election, a change election, and an election when the Conservatives were winning across the province, an incumbent, even though only for a year, got a real scare by Michelle McLeave Kennedy. So I hope this indicates to him as an MPP that he really needs to up his game and to ensure that he's representing not just the people who voted for him, but the people of the whole riding.
And what their voices were saying by casting those votes for Michelle and the NDP.
I'm sure he will take that into account in how he approaches the representation that he's been given.
So you were talking about Northern Ontario and the NDP, and I mean, if we look across from here to Sudbury and down, why do you think that we were the different story? Why did you say
the election question in this election? There was one question. All of the others were peripheral, and that was who can beat the Liberals. Mm-hmm. That was the election question. And in Northern Ontario, generally, the New Democrats have a lot of support. So if you were interested in changing government and getting rid of the Liberals, which is what the issue was, you voted New Democrat. Whereas in other parts of the province, such as Eastern Ontario, for instance, and some parts around the GTA, it was up for grabs. It could have been either the Conservatives or the Liberals in the GTA, whereas in Eastern Ontario it would have been Conservatives generally, except for Ottawa Centre, and a couple of ridings in the Ottawa area. The rest of Eastern Ontario was basically Conservative. So people were looking for an alternative to the Liberals, and in Northern Ontario, that was most likely in most ridings to be New Democrats.
And in Sault Ste. Marie, I think it was the obvious that in a way, we predated the election by the by-election last year. And so people had already voted for change when they voted for Ross Romano last June. And so they were still, but again, obviously, a lot of people really thought carefully and cautiously about who they were going to vote for when you see how close the final results were. But I think now, you know, Bud rather led into this, I think now it's looking at, so what is going to be the agenda, and what are the issues, and what are the concerns that the new Conservative government, what do they have to face, and what will our continuing MPP for Sault Ste. Marie, what will he be able to raise and bring to this government and see some results on for Sault Ste. Marie. And I think that's going to be the big question now for people as we lead into what will in all likelihood be 4 years of a Conservative government for the province, and looking forward at what those issues are going to be. So you know, the Conservatives did campaign on that they were going to be the fiscally responsible, job-creating governments. We've heard that from the Conservatives many times in the past. Certainly Ross Romano, some of the issues that he's identified as being key are certainly linked to the economy, the resolving final resolution to the Algoma steel issues. Of course, with steel tariffs coming in from the U.S., that raises a whole new can of worms, really, to be addressed at both federal and provincial levels of government. So that's going to be quite a big challenge, I think, in terms of just our city's future. But it's also looking at, you know, does the economy require a broader base of support, which is what, you know, as a researcher, and that's the research all points in the direction that we need a much broader base of support, that you can't simply do things to support business and think that that's going to resolve our economic woes. If that resolved our economic woes, we already experienced a Mike Harris government that brought in all kinds of supposed supports for business, and that did not help our economic woes. Right. So we have to look at, you know, are we going to broaden our base? And I hope that our MPP and our new government is going to be prepared to look at Northern Ontario's needs in a more comprehensive and holistic way than simply saying, oh, we're going to remove some red tape and we're going to reduce gas prices, which I'm not sure, I don't think any government has been successful yet at reducing gas prices. Yeah. So that will be interesting.
I'm looking forward to the bucket beer.
I want to get you to weigh in on your projections for the future, but after this break. So stay with us on point with Dr. Gail Broad and Bud Wildman talking about the election results and the future for the province of Ontario under the majority provincial progressive conservative government under the leadership of Premier Doug Ford. Stay with us on point. Around On Point. So, Bud Wildman, we heard from Dr. Gail Broad about her sort of projections for what the future is going to hold. What do you think are going to be some of the work that's going to have to be done by the Conservatives as they take the lead here?
Well, Mr. Ford faces a number of challenges. It's important to recognize that the Conservatives paid a great deal of attention, both under the previous leader and under Mr. Ford, to Northern Ontario. But overall, he said that he's going to save $6 billion from the provincial budget.
Just by trimming the fat?
Yes, and nobody's going to lose a job, he has said. And he has also said that there should be 4% available for savings throughout the budget. When you look at the provincial budget, 40-some%, a little over 40% is for healthcare.
Healthcare.
The second largest section is for education.
Yes.
If you cut let's say simplistically that you were going to cut $6 billion total, and you're only almost $3 billion is going to be cut from healthcare. That's completely unsustainable. He says at the same time he's going to get rid of corridor medicine in healthcare. Well, you can't cut and at the same time increase. So the challenge is going to be, what is he going to do when he comes to determining the budget for the province and keeping his promises? It is a significant arithmetical problem. He says he's going to cut taxes, he's going to lower the gas prices, and he's going to cut taxes by 20%. Well, if he's going to cut taxes by 20%, he's going to cut expenditures, where is the money going to come from? If he also says he's going to get rid of cap and trade, which is a significant revenue source for the previous Liberal government, that's another cost to the budget. Now, I'm not suggesting that these promises are unreasonable. It's just that we don't know how he's going to do it. And it's going to be a very great challenge for whoever is the Minister of Finance to be able to put this all together.
And I guess added to that, again, one of the big concerns, which feeds back to my original comment about Algoma Steel, is he's also made a commitment in Sault Ste. Marie when he was here that he would support the Huron Central Railway to the tune of $25 million. So that's another, like where is this money going to come from to do that? So I think that's been one of the, significant concerns. The other piece of things, though, that I want to return to for a moment is looking at why the research is saying that you have to take a broader approach and that you have to look at people. Our workforce, and we know this in Northern Ontario extremely well, workforce is 50% of any business. You need the investment and the wise business leadership. The workforce itself, though, makes the business. And I'm saying 50%. You could say 90%. It depends on the type of business. Certainly with technology.
Service industry and government, it's about 70%.
Exactly. So, you have to have a healthy workforce. And we know in Northern Ontario our workforce is aging. I heard an individual the other day say, well, I've got to vote Conservative because I have to vote for more jobs in the economy. Well, who exactly is going to fill those jobs? Our young people are leaving. We're not very attractive as yet to newcomers. There's a real strong effort by municipalities to try to make us more attractive to newcomers, both to Canada as well as to Northern Ontario. But we have to do a lot of work, and we have to invest in the kinds of services, the kinds of programs that, for example, newcomers may not speak English very well. They may need some English. They may need a place where they can gather with people like themselves who are struggling to find comfort in the culture of a new country. Well, we need to be providing those kinds of things. And if we're not going to have a workforce here that will support us as we age.
We'll be right back to talk some more with Dr. Gail Broad and Bud Wildman. Staying with us, 60 seconds. So, Bud, let's talk about what Ross is going to be facing now as far as local issues. What do you think he's going to be tackling?
Well, obviously the issue of the future of Algoma Steel is crucial, and the possibility of a trade war involving the United States and Canada and Japan and Europe, which would have a tremendously poor effect on the prospects of the whole country, not just of Sault Ste. Marie and Northern Ontario. But both Ross Romano and Mr. Ford emphasized the need for the moving forward on the development of the Ring of Fire, and for Northern Ontario generally, and the possibility of the smelter being located in Sault Ste. Marie, among a number of other possible communities. I think that those have to be Mr. Romano's priorities, and we have to do this in a way that involves the First Nations in the local area and also deals with the possible environmental effects of the development. So that's a big, tall order, and it's no guarantee that it's actually going to happen in Sault Ste. Marie in terms of the smelter. The choice of the company will be largely made on the basis of the market and what other communities are proposing as advantages for them as opposed to the Sioux. So it's a tall order, but it's an important one.
Gail?
Well, I think in addition to the economic issues that we've spoken of, I think that there's also, we have a 600-person waiting list on need for supportive care. And that is a very large number of people, considering the number of beds that we actually have in the Sioux. And Right now, it's as long as a 2-year waiting list. In addition to that, we have a hospital that has been consistently stating, we're close to the edge, but we also have an opioid crisis that needs to be addressed, and that we have a proposal in for a new facility to support dealing with that.
Yes.
So there's a lot of issues, both economic and social, on the table. And I want to say that I really wish Ross Romano well. I think he's going to have a lot of work ahead of him. And I certainly hope that he can take these issues forward and make his voice heard well in Queen's Park on behalf of the people of Sault Ste. Marie.
I cannot thank the two of you enough. I have enjoyed so much our conversations. You came on before the election, you're here after the election. Gail, you were with us last night. Here at ONNtv, we're very grateful for your support and for your experience and your knowledge that you share with us, and we look forward to having you back again and again as these elections keep happening. Thank you also for joining us, and it's going to be a very interesting time for all of us here in Sault Ste. Marie and in the province of Ontario. So best of luck to all of us, and we'll see you next time on Point. Thanks.